Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. Today on the show, we've got Alex. Alex, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to have you here. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to it. I am I feel like we're going to talk more about tRPC. So actually, before I start talking about that at all, let's maybe start by just having you talk a little bit about yourself. Can you say a bit of background for yourself?
Yeah, cool. I'm Alex. I'm Swedish, and I've been making websites and everything programming related since I was a kid. So I did my first website in the late 90s and sort of got into more serious programming and stuff while I was doing gaming as a teenager. I think that's a familiar story for a lot of people. I was playing a lot of Counter-Strike, had a clan. A clan needs a website, and
Yeah.
was the guy doing a lot of that. And then I got into hosting my own Counter-Strike servers and started a little company with that, where I had a server in my mom's closet and did a website where you can book a server, configure that. And through that, like I sort of learned the foundation of everything web related and Linux and whatnot. It was a pure LAMP stack back then. This
Mm.
is like 2005, 2006 or something like that. So I was sort of born in the LAMP PHP stack, and you will probably see some of that in tRPC as well. Because ever since I worked with PHP, I've sort of missed that feeling of just having everything in the same place. You can sort of like do a database call straight in your HTML sort of, and just render stuff dynamically from the server.
Right.
But yeah, I started working professionally as a developer in 2009 or something like that, and been jumping around the stack from like front end to back end on iOS and Android development, and lived in a bunch of different countries. Right now, I'm back in Sweden, live in Stockholm right now, and I'm currently working for a startup that is in stealth mode. So I'm not going to talk too much about that.
Got it. Okay, so I am very curious about tRPC. I feel like it's something that I've heard a ton about. And so let me do a quick preface. For everybody who's wondering why I'm on my MacBook Pro camera and the MacBook mic, it's because I am in the middle of moving and I just accidentally turned off the internet at my current house, and I'm in the new house, which has nothing in it yet, and I haven't had time to actually set all of my stuff up yet. Yeah, so anyways, welcome to the new house. And we'll be back up and running by Thursday when I get all my gear moved over here. And also thank you, RDS Lugo, for the sub. I appreciate that. Okay, so with tRPC, I don't know anything about it, right? Like this is sort of my very true to the spirit of the show. I don't know a single thing about tRPC except the tagline, which is that it promises end-to-end type-safe APIs. So
Yeah.
for someone like me who has no context on what tRPC is, can you give us the overview?
Well, so you have probably built an API before, and you probably used that API in a front end. So traditionally speaking, when you do an API nowadays, either you probably want to document your API somehow with a schema or something like that. So the two main ways of doing APIs today is either through like Swagger / Open API schemas or GraphQL. But when you're working with either OpenAPI or GraphQL, you sort of like bringing in a new language into the stack. Either it's YAML or GraphQL, even though your both front and the back end might be written in the same language. So what tRPC tries to do is that instead of you having a clunky API definition, you just write functions on your back end, and then you can infer the type signature of those functions on your client. So it completely removes the need for an API schema because it's just guaranteed by TypeScript itself. So it's a way to, so RPC stands for remote procedure call. So tRPC is TypeScript remote procedure call. It helps you to call remote functions on your client.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so so this is interesting. So is somebody asked in the chat earlier, is this related to gRPC?
No, it's not related to gRPC at all. Okay. It's a common misconception because of the similarity of the names, but both are sort of RPC inspired things, right?
Got it. So is RPC something that is it like a common, computer science concept, and this is, so the tRPC is the TypeScript implementation of this existing concept, or is there something else to it?
So RPC, I mean, I should actually look into the history of this a bit more, but it's a really old school way of dealing with APIs. So traditionally speaking, when you have a system that needs to talk to another system, you then, rather than sending a lot of data back and forth, like some strings or whatever, you expose a sort of a function from that system to the other system that you can call as if you're a part of that system. And it's really, really old way of doing APIs. It predates it goes way back. Gotcha.
Okay. And so I think my initial question whenever we start introducing a technology that a lot of people are going to be new to is, what is the benefit over, so we talk about we're defining APIs and sharing them out with people, right? So there are a bunch of ways that we could do that. Two of the most common that I've seen now are REST and GraphQL seem to be the two ways that people tend to reach for first. And when you've got a GraphQL API, you are defining a schema, as you said, and then that schema gives you the ability to kind of introspect and figure out this is exactly what's coming out. So it offers a similar benefit in that I write my schema to define my GraphQL API, and then anybody consuming that can use that schema to say, well, this is exactly what's going to come back and what the types are and all those things. Now with REST would give me the ability to optionally create an open API spec or something similar that would let me share my types with anybody who wants to consume it. But that one's not automatic. That one is going to be, I have to maintain my open API spec and not let it drift out of sync with the production code. So maybe the first one is, you said tRPC is going to automatically, based on your TypeScript, generate this type safety without doing anything with the schema. So how do you compare and contrast the benefits of like tRPC versus GraphQL?
So I can preface this with me being, I'm a massive GraphQL fan. As soon as GraphQL got released, I was all over it. And I've been an ambassador for using GraphQL for 6 years now, and I still am. So tRPC is an alternative to GraphQL, right? In GraphQL, you sort of define a full data modeling for the whole domain of what you can query on the server, and it's sort of like, it's a language in itself, right? And then from that definition, you then derive, this is how I fetch a specific thing in my backend. And then on the front end, you then can use those types of the schema to generate, for instance, TypeScript definitions. And the thing that I have discovered is that a lot of the power features that you have from GraphQL are things you don't really necessarily need in a smaller scale. And the thing that drove me to create GraphQL is drove me to create tRPC is sort of like, if I just have TypeScript on both ends, why do I need to write a schema and whatever? Can't I just like get the value from the function I'm defining my backend and get that straight to the front end without adding a library for code generation on the back end and a library for code generations on the front end to transform this GraphQL schema into TypeScript. So what tRPC gives you is the main thing is speed. All you have to do is you define a function on your backend, you call that function on your front end, and that's it. You don't have to have any code generation. You don't have to really think about the schema. Obviously, you need to think that you don't return any sensitive data from the backend. But all you need to do is to define, this is the input validation that this function requires, and then you return data, and that data is then available straight away on the client without any further work.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. So when we're talking about, one of the things that I think is the biggest barriers to adoption for GraphQL is that you don't just like write GraphQL code. You have to write a schema, you've got to write resolvers, you've got to write, there's a decent amount of code and boilerplate that goes into getting the GraphQL API set up, which absolutely makes sense. Like you, I'm a big fan of GraphQL, but I think, we've got to be pragmatic about our choices. And sometimes GraphQL is just too much for what you need. Like if you're not modeling very complex, actually graph-like data, a lot of times you just don't need all of that. And so this idea of using tRPC where I get to write a function and that function is what I would have written anyways. I need to pull this data from somewhere. And then the client is able to just infer the types the same way that I would get with GraphQL, which is one of the reasons I like it. So you've got me interested here because this sounds like what I've wanted for a long time, which is the benefits of GraphQL without the initial setup. So how much setup are we talking when we look at bringing tRPC into a project? Is it something that I drop in a few lines of code? Is it, is it a ton of backend boilerplate, or, what are we up against when we start thinking about putting it into our projects?
It's not much really, because the thing that's a bit different from GraphQL is that like you have the GraphQL spec and you have the GraphQL node library, whatever that you use on the backend, but you don't have helpers for the types. You don't have helpers for how you do the client. If you want to do a client, you have to install a second package, which is like Apollo or Urkel or Relay. With tRPC, you use the tRPC server on the server, and then you use the tRPC client on the client. And if you use React, you then also add in the tRPC React client, which depends on React query. So in that one, you get all of the features that React query has, plus extra type information of everything you call.
Gotcha. Okay. So is there a particular set of problems that you're going to reach for tRPC with? Or I guess to rephrase that question, where does tRPC shine? Like, when is it the right tool for the job?
So private APIs within a company. So if you're not going to have a publicly exposed API that third parties are using, you don't really need this rigid API spec that both Swagger and GraphQL offers. Then all you need to do then is to trust TypeScript that it infers the right types. Use tRPC, and you can just trust the types rather than keeping a big schema up to date. So yeah, like any organization that is like heavily invested in TypeScript, they're probably makes sense because yeah, if you're gonna have like a native iOS app in Swift or whatever, it might not make sense to use tRPC because then you have to write a Swift client for tRPC, and it's you'll miss all the type safety. But if you're working with full stack web or React Native, or in general work with TypeScript everywhere, then tRPC is really good.
Gotcha. And you mentioned that there's like a React package. Is tRPC tied to a given framework or front end, or can you use it in any JavaScript project?
So I'm heavily invested in React myself. So I spent most of the time, like I made an official React adapter and an official Next.js adapter as well. But people have done adapters for Svelte and other libraries as well. So there's, as I said before, the official tRPC packages are four distinct different packages. We have the server, the client, the React, and Next. And the server and the client are not dependent on React as such. There's a bunch of people that are using it for like server-to-server communication. When you write like a CLI or something like that, you can use it just to call like from the CLI to the server.
Nice, very nice. Okay. So and you mentioned so if you are writing a Swift app, that's one case where you wouldn't recommend tRPC. Are there any other places where you would say it's probably not the right tool for the job?
So if you're anything but invested in TypeScript, and if you want to do a public API, although I'm working right now on something that will automatically generate an open API schema from your tRPC backend. So even that will be possible soon.
Gotcha. Okay. I mean, that sounds pretty exciting. And all the rest of my questions are about implementation. So I think this is a good break point for us to switch over and start actually coding. So let me take us over to the other setup here. Here's the programming setup. All right. And now I'll just start us off by doing a quick shout to our captioning. We've got Rachel here with us today from White Coat Captioning, and that is available on the homepage, learnwithjason.dev. That is made possible through the support of our sponsors, Netlify, NX, and Backlight, all kicking in to make this show more accessible, more fun, give us a little more bandwidth. We are talking today to Alex. If you don't follow Alex, you can head over and give him a follow on Twitter right now. And we're specifically talking about tRPC, which is at trpc.io. With that being said, we have now reached the end of my knowledge of how to get started. Audio bitrate issue, dang it. What's going on? My bitrate is a little choppy today. Let me see here. Just a moment. Let me do some debugging, make sure that I'm not doing anything silly. Get to my device settings, mic resolution.
Hey Theo, what's up?
Okay, so I dropped down to 720p to see if that's going to make any difference in the audio quality. Hopefully it will. I'm like sitting right next to a fiber modem, of course. So, first day jitters, I guess, for this modem. Let me know if my audio keeps doing anything weird. I am just using the MacBook Pro mic today, so I apologize for the boominess of this audio. All right, so let's forge ahead here. And all right, I need to create my first setup here. So what are my first steps if I'm looking to do tRPC from scratch?
Okay, so what is your normal setup? Like, do you use Next.js? Do you use React?
I can use either. I typically reach for React. Like we could set up a create React app, or I've been using Remix a lot lately. Next is
what I usually try to push people to do is to start off with one of the example apps, because then you get all of the boilerplate set up for you. So the recommended one is the top one, as you see here, which is the Next.js one, because that example is set up with everything you need for a production-ready app. You have Playwright for end-to-end testing. You have Jest set up for integration testing. You have Prisma. You have end-to-end type safety, of course, and server-side rendering and stuff like that. So let's hope that this works.
Okay, so we're running the create next app, and we are going to use the tRPC repo, and then example path goes into examples. Next Prisma starter. I didn't realize that this was possible, so this is actually a cool little bonus, and so it's going into here, right? Yeah. So that's clever. I didn't know that they let you do that. That's cool. So we have installed. We're downloading. It's going to get all of our dependencies and all that good stuff in here. Fetching packages. And you said this is going to include all the goodies.
A bunch of stuff. Yeah, so I have some helper commands to set up like a Postgres database locally with a new command as well.
Nice. Oh yeah, we've got the ability to seed the database. Start the database, migrate it, seed, good.
It also has a render YAML for deployment, or we can deploy it on Vercel.
Cool. All right. So we've got all the pieces we need here, and it looks like we're done. So here we go into tRPC Prisma starter. We've got our node modules here, so I can just run yarn dev.
Let's see if that works. So it says it's running, right? But I think that's too easy. It should start. We need to create a database as well.
Okay. So it started, but we don't have a database, which would mean invalid post find many. Yep, no posts yet. So we need to create our database.
Yeah. So if you open the project in VS Code or something, and then look in the README, there's some commands to help you out here. So it has a yarn dx command, which is a command that should start up a Docker container for you if you have Docker installed.
Let's see. I thought I had Docker installed. I don't have Docker installed, which is going to be interesting. How long does it take to set up Docker on a new computer?
We don't have to do that. We can work around it as well.
Okay, that might be wise.
Yeah. Do you have Postgres set up locally? Otherwise, we can switch to SQLite.
We might need to do SQLite.
Okay. Then we start this session with some debugging. So if we go into the Prisma schema, which is in the Prisma folder, the schema,
just
here,
second, because I need to. It's ignoring this whole folder, so I'm going to actually close and then open it again so that we can actually see these folders. There's Prisma, schema. There we go.
And then we need to switch the provider to SQLite. I think Prisma gives you auto completion there, right?
Let's see. It wants to give me SQLite. There we go. Okay.
And then we have to update the database URL, which is in the .env file. And here we need something which is like a file path, file colon, let me see. File colon dot slash dev dot db you can write.
Like that?
Yeah, skip the slash slash.
Skip the slash slash.
Yeah, like that. And then now we need to run the Prisma command to sort of set this database up. So in the package JSON, I think I have a shortcut for that, which is like migrate dev or something. Yeah, db migrate dev. We can run that one.
Okay. SQLite does not mess one in the migration lock.toml.
Okay.
Move your current migration directory. It's not going to like
Yes.
that.
So we
So do
already
I
have some migrations. So if you just nuke that folder, we can move on.
Okay.
Name call that init.
There we go.
And now, hopefully, we can run yarn dev.
Yarn dev or yarn dx?
Yarn dev, because the yarn dx will also try to set up the Postgres database for you using Docker.
Gotcha. Okay, so it's doing Prisma queries. That seems good. And so if I come back out here and I reload the page, it did a select for us. And so if I add a post, all right.
Great.
We're in and running.
So we have our first app. So we can start by looking at what's going on here, and then maybe we can try to add a feature or something like that.
Sure, yeah.
Do you have an idea of what you want to build? Have you thought about something?
So I think what I would love to be able to do is, for me, the light bulb moment is when we realize how to like really connect this thing end to end. So the starters are always really helpful, but it's sometimes hard to tell which pieces are part of the starter and which pieces are sort of for convenience to make it look nice or to do something else. So I think what I would love to see here is what is the process of adding something to my database? So maybe we can just add a completely new type and then write maybe the CRUD, or maybe not even all of it, just like create and read. Put something new into the database and get it out and show how that type safety works in the process.
Okay, so how about we add some comments to our posts? Maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah, let's do it.
So maybe first I can explain the folder structure here. If you make that window full screen, it's going to be easier to read for us.
Okay.
So I can walk through the folder structure of the project to just show you what's in here. So the standard Next.js stuff that we have is sort of the source and the source pages folder, and that's what does the sort of Next.js magic of mapping a React component to a specific route in the browser. And then we have what we've added for tRPC, we have in the _app.tsx, we've created a tRPC high order function that we wrap this app with.
Okay.
And here we wrap with tRPC, and here we do some boilerplate to set up like a logger when we do an API call, and we say that we want to batch our HTTP call. So if you do 2 parallel requests, they will be combined into one request in the browser.
Nice.
Similar to GraphQL, you have automatic batching for parallelized stuff. So this is set up with SSR, I believe. So that means that when you reload the page, the server will do a pre-pass and fetch everything that's needed for this page before it's rendered.
Okay.
So here's the app, and then we can look at the page's index file to just look at our first tRPC query. So here you see we're using tRPC use query post to all. And if you hover over, for instance, post query, you will see that that has a bunch of types. So you see that has the ID, title, text, and created at. And that's inferred straight from our backend function.
Great.
So if we go to the server folder instead in the source server, we can see where this data comes from. It comes from routers and the post router.
Okay.
And here we should be able to find a function that is called all, because we queried post all.
Let's see, so we have our post router, and then we've got all. And this is going to do a Prisma find many. And if you're not familiar with Prisma, we do have an episode on it that you can go and watch to get you familiar. That's with Nico from the Prisma team. And here, let's see, we've got Prisma returning our post, our find many, and this default post select is just the fields, that's pretty slick. Okay, I got you.
So I usually just define sort of the data object globally so I can reuse it. So I always make sure to do an explicit select when I use Prisma, so we didn't accidentally leak any extra stuff that we don't want to return to the browser. So here we're using a Prisma validator. But to just give you a glimpse of the power of tRPC, what you can do is to have the post index page open at the same time as you have the server, and you'll be able to see how types are inferred. So maybe you can split this with the, like this. And you can just change this to not return like updated at. Just comment that out. You don't even need to save. And you can see that disappears straight away.
Wow, that is real fast.
So there's no code generation involved. You don't even need to have like your server running to have this working.
That's slick. So, and is this because it's TypeScript? This is just kind of leaning on the VS Code TypeScript parsing that's built in.
Yeah, exactly. So
nice.
We have a base app router in our server that we sort of gradually extend with more and more types, and that sort of gets resolved into a massive object, which we then can infer on the client, and then map different sort of strings like post.all to a certain type.
Gotcha. Okay. So this is, I mean, I'm following you. This is pretty slick, and we can see that. So we've got our router here, and the router is leaning on some Prisma stuff, and that gives us the ability to use these queries, and the queries bring back our posts, all of which totally makes sense. I'm getting it. And then once we have our post query, we can just come down here and throw data on the screen the way that we would want to, which is, okay. So that makes sense. I'm with you. I'm following. So,
And the very nice thing with this as well is that the app barely has any TypeScript in it. The code you're writing and the code you're seeing here is 99% just normal JavaScript, and everything happens through in TypeScript inference. So you sort of get the best of both worlds. You get the TypeScript safety, but
yeah.
the sort of ease of writing normal JavaScript, and the errors you might receive are just there to guide you when you fuck up.
Yeah. And so this here, this is like the only TypeScript I'm actually seeing in this page, right? Is this this kind of like form submission handling. That's nice. That is really nice that you don't have to like write a ton of types to make this work. And in fact, we didn't write any types for the tRPC side of things. That all just got done for us. And pretty similar here. There's a little bit of TypeScript going on, but this is largely just JavaScript. There's nothing nothing challenging here for me as somebody who's kind of passively familiar with TypeScript. Also, this uses TypeScript the way that I like TypeScript to be used, which is that it gives me autocomplete and it'll give me validation that I'm using something wrong, but it doesn't require me to like dive into the language of TypeScript and figure out how to write. Like, I don't want to have to figure out how to write these really complicated generics or figure out how to wrangle the complexity of you know, when you start having data that can do different things. Types in TypeScript can get so out of hand so fast. So I love that this is just sort of living on the things that I like, the benefits of TypeScript, without digging into the really complex stuff.
Yeah, I'm on the belief that TypeScript don't really belong in normal apps. TypeScript, no, sorry, generics. TypeScript generics doesn't really belong in application code. And the sort of complexity of dealing with generics should ideally be offloaded to a library.
That is very much my feeling as well. I feel like if I have to read a generic type, I'm immediately unclear on what the thing does, and I'm no longer getting a benefit from TypeScript. I'm now like just hoping that I don't break it, which feels like it kind of works counter to the benefit.
And that's also, I know it's a bit counterintuitive to start from an example, but I want to start from an example because the sort of boilerplate of tRPC might look a bit intimidating because we have some generics that needs to be there to infer stuff from the client to the server. But once that's set up, you don't have to think about that again. And that's why I wanted to start from like an already set up example, so we don't get stuck with the sort of TypeScript generic wrangling of this.
Gotcha. Okay. So this all makes sense. We're creating a router. We've got a health checkpoint. We merge in the post router. Okay, so that's where we got our post dot from, and that's all built in here. So, all right. So the next thing that I'd like to do is, you had talked about adding some comments. So if I want to add comments to this, where do I start? Like, my instinct would be to head over to this Prisma schema and start just defining the comment type.
Yeah, so we have like 3 elements that we need to add when we add comments, right? First, we need to add the stuff in the database, which is Prisma. Then we need to have some sort of API logic or backend logic to talk to Prisma, and that's in a router. And then the third thing we need to add is some UI, and that's probably on the post/ID page. So in whatever end you want to start, we can start. You can start with UI, or you can start with Prisma.
Okay. Let's assume that we're going to do this the front end dev way. I want to try getting some comments on the screen, and so my idea down here is to do something like comments for this post, and we're going to put up a UL and an LI, and we'll say, let's say, so we'll give like a comment title, and then we need some comment body. Right. So this is a pretty generic comment setup, and we could do make it a pretty usual comment post area, right? But so then when we come out here and we look at these, we click in and we get some, basic comments, nothing fancy, nothing special, but this does what we want it to do. We've got a name and the thing the person said.
And then you probably want that to be hooked into an API.
Right. So up here, I'm getting the post by ID. And so what I would want to do is load comments for this post.
Oof. That was smart.
Yeah, this GitHub Copilot stuff really saves me a lot of time.
Okay, so I mean, you can try writing that post as that query here to see that you actually get an error.
Okay, so I would do like comments query, and that would be tRPC, use query, and I would want like comments by post ID.
Yeah.
And what else? And then I need to give it an ID.
So that needs to be in the tuple that you have there. So
got it.
Yeah, exactly. This is a convention that comes from React Query. So when you have like a query key, and then you have a query path, and then a query input.
Gotcha. Okay. So
now you see that, yeah, this is red now because that doesn't exist. And you also see there that we get all of the routes that actually exist in our backend shows up there. So I guess we can try to go ahead and create it.
Yeah. All right. So let me see if I can reason my way through this. So what I would do next is, I know that the post router has to come in like this. So I would create a comments.ts, and I would look in here, and okay, so I'm going to need Prisma. I'm going to need Prisma client, tRPC server, Zod, and this create router. Okay, great. I need all that. So let me grab it, take it into my comments. And then the next thing that I need is in here. I'll end up needing one of these, but I don't know exactly what it is yet. So then I would have my export const comment router equals create router. Let's grab that one. And we'll say comment router. And just so we're not going to do a mutation yet. We will need a query. Need one of those. All right. Yeah. And so all of that will need to go in, but for right now, it kind of doesn't need to do anything just yet. So this is incomplete, but theoretically a correct kind of setup. Yeah. And then I go back to my router app, and I need my comment router. I'll get this from comments. And then down here, I just need to duplicate that, and we'll call this comments. Okay. So theoretically speaking, now this doesn't actually register anything because we didn't put any routes under there, but as far as plumbing goes, this is correct. Now we just need to line up how to get actual data in here. So maybe we look at this one because we're going to go by post ID.
Yeah. So the thing, when you define a tRPC procedure, you always have a resolve function. That is sort of like, if you're familiar with GraphQL, you also have a resolve function in a sort of backend implementation of GraphQL. And then you can optionally define an input type for it. And the input type has to be some sort of validator. In all of my reference code, I use Zod, which is a good validation library, but it also works with Yup or Joy, or there's a few others that I've added support for. So you can add an input, which is a Z object. It can be of any type, but we only accept one input argument. And then you have a resolve function that automatically infers that input based on the based on the shape you define there.
Got it. Okay. And so if we want to fake this for now, that's going to be, what was it, a z dot string. Okay. So that'll take an input of a z dot string. Why don't you like this? Oh, it just wants that to go away.
Conflicting.
Down here, we could kind of fake this, right? And we could do an ID1, we could do a name of, you know, some person and a text. Thank you, GitHub Copilot. And then do another one. So now we've got like sort of the structure that we're going after, but we need to determine what the that return type would be. And so this would effectively be our return type, right?
Yeah.
So if I take this.
You don't need to define any return type.
Oh,
it's there automatically because you define an object which has an array of those strings, so, and you return that, so that should be inferred.
Nice. Okay. And now that I've saved and let it format, it's happy again with that. So then if I'm correct here, this should work and give me my comments, which are now typed, which is amazing. So I didn't have to do anything there. I just get my ID, name, and text, and then I can take my comments query, and that's going to give me back a status like so.
Yeah, so here's some plumbing. I've written in my own apps, I've written some abstractions that are similar to, I saw that you did a talk with Redwood recently. I've done my own implementation of sort of cells for this, so you don't have to do all of this like if loading, if error. But for now, you can just skip the loading state and just do optional chaining on the comments. You can just do like comments query dot data question mark.
Got it. Okay. And then does that come back as?
That should be an array.
That'll be an array. Okay, so then we'll do one of these in like a map. Wait. I'm doing that backwards.
Yeah, it's backwards. Exactly.
Then we've got our comment, and in here we can take this junk out that I don't need anymore. We'll move this up to the top, and then we'll move this up to the top. A couple of these in. Delete that one, and then this will be.
I'm seeing some comments here. Faraz asked if I'm missing some of the history of the comments. Something about Prisma where input. I think the question.
Is it possible for these inputs to just be Prisma types, Prisma where input, for example?
So the reason why we have a validator here is that we actually want to validate the input that comes from the client. We could say that we're getting an input of any type, but that wouldn't be runtime safe. And that's why we want to have a validator in place. So I know in Blitz.js, for instance, in their example code, they used to have like input is of this shape, and then we use that. However, that means that in runtime, we can actually send any object, and that would be passed straight to a database. So it's very good to have a schema there for the input that actually validates it at runtime. And yeah, I'm also interested in integrating with Redwood.
So I just want to call this out here that we were able to looking at the posts, I was able to work us backward here to get these comments loaded on the screen. So these are our hard-coded like database of comments that's now loading on the screen. So if I come in here and say, change that out, right? It does exactly what we want it to do. So the next piece then is just figuring out, instead of hard coding this data, we've got to get it from Prisma. And to do that, I'm going to go look at this post again, where this one is saying it gets the ID out of the input, and then it's going to get the comments by doing a Prisma. And in our case, it would be a comment find many or find unique, find many, where
I'm
ID,
going to do a find many, right?
and then we'll put in our default comment select, which we need to define. But
so the default comment select part is completely optional. It's just a convention that I try to do and follow. So I try to just leave hints in this example project on how is a good way to set things up, but it's nothing you have to do. You could also just do a find many.
Got it. And look at this thing just understanding how this stuff works.
That's mad.
Unbelievable. Okay, so let's go define this actually before we start writing this stuff down, because otherwise it's going to feel way too much like magic. So let me go to my schema and let's make this full width here. That across as well. Okay, so here's our Prisma schema, and I want a comment. So I'm going to, let's see, I did one too many. So my comment is going to have an ID, the default. So I'm going to need to rewrite that because it's not going to be a number. It's going to be a string. It's going to have a name. It's going to have text. And then I also need it to have a post ID, which will be a string.
I think you can just write post colon or post and then write a model post, right? If you just write remove the .id, and I think when you just save with post, and if you remove the model part and just remove just save this, doesn't Prisma do it? Yeah.
Oh, it did it for me.
Yeah.
I did not realize that. That's cool. That's a good little autosave tip.
But you probably want to, yeah, exactly. You need that one that you just removed. It's because you called this post ID, but you need to call
that to be post.
Yeah.
Okay.
Prisma does really good autocompletion like this. You say like, I want to connect these two things, and then it does it.
Save me from myself. Okay, so that's great. So this will take the post ID, which is this post ID, and reference it to the ID, which is this ID, so that we end up with a one-to-many relationship here. One post can have many comments. Okay, so that makes sense. And then can I just run that Prisma migrate?
Yeah, now the only thing you need to do is to run migrate and update the query.
Okay, so I'm going to go back in here, get your shortcut that you wrote. which was db migrate dev. So we'll run yarn db migrate dev, call this one comments, and that should work. If I want to, do you remember off the top of your head what the command is to open the Prisma dashboard? So
Studio, yarn Prisma Studio, I think.
Yarn Prisma Studio. Okay.
Yeah.
So this gives us, this is like a Prisma built in so that we don't have to build all of the things that we need. So I'm going to just jump into comment here and add some. So let me add a record, and this will be the post. Now the post is going to be this one, and this will be, say this one is going to be Sally Bananas, and then that stuff will all get added for us, and then I'm going to add one more record, and this one will also be for this post, and then it'll be Joey pancakes. I'm hungry. Okay, save 2 changes. Oh wait, I broke it. How do I get it to do the thing?
Yeah, that should work, no?
Oh, come on.
Do you have to give a proper date there?
Fine. Let's see if I can do this from memory. 04, 05, and then it's going to be, it is currently 11:27. Crap, what is it? Minus.
Impressive if you get that right. But doesn't it have a default already on the...
It really should have, but I think when I clicked into it, I broke it. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to delete that record. I'm going to save this change. I'm going to add another record, and we're just going to do this again, and I'm not going to get in there. So this is the post ID. I don't need the post ID. I'm going to set that by selecting from here. Okay, then we're going to go and say this post is the worst. Okay, save one change. All right, so that then means that we should have 2 posts, both linked to our existing post. And if I come back here and I run dev, we're now running against our updated database that's got the comments in it. And so theoretically speaking, I should be able to actually use these. So my default comment select is going to be very similar to this default post select. So I'm actually just going to start with that one. And this is going to be a comment. We need an ID. We need a name. Whoa, it picked that up for us. Look at that. That is slick. Okay, so then when I put a name in, it's happy. And if I go over the top of this comment select, it just shows us what's about. Oh, that's so freaking cool. Okay. And we don't really need any of the other pieces here, right? We know what post is because we're selecting by the post ID. So I don't need those fields. So then if I come down here, right, I should be able to, let's go side by side so I can see what's going on. We've got our post, and we're going to go const ID equals input. And then we need to do a const post equals await Prisma comments. And we're going to do a find many.
Mm-hmm. And then it's a where?
ID is going to be ID. And select will be our default comment select. Okay. And that to be comments. And then if no comments, we can throw, okay, so talk to me about what this tRPC error does.
Yeah,
here.
so for a collection, you wouldn't really do this. Potentially, you would return null for an empty array. But this is sort of, if you query for a post that doesn't exist, you typically want to show a 404 page, and you can do that in a few different ways. On the client, you can do like a null check and render a 404 page, or you can throw an error and and automatically pick it up when we server-side rendering it. So if we throw errors, we can then propagate those errors into the sort of the page handler for when we load this on the server and give it the right status code straight away. So we don't need it in this case. You can just do like if length is equals to null, show no posts or no comments.
Okay, but so in this case, because we kind of don't care, like we want an empty array, we can just return comments because Prisma it'll return an empty array if we don't, if nothing's found. Okay, so then
and that should just work. And if it doesn't work, you should have type errors.
Let's go give it a shot. Look at it.
Right.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so this is actually something that I think is really exciting. This isn't one of those cases where I've used the tool before and I have passing familiarity with it, and so I'm able to kind of fumble around. I've literally never seen tRPC before today. And so I think this is a good vote of confidence for the kind of intuitiveness once you get up and running, that, I was able to reverse engineer my way toward building this very type safe setup here. And if I go back out to my ID and we look, I can see what my available things are. And if I go to put something else here, we can do like a posted on, and I can do comment dot created at, right? And then this is going to look terrible, but it'll at least let me
it's because you're actually trying to render a date now, so you need to do to locale the string or something like that.
So to locale date string, and there we go, right? So it's just nice that you can do that sort of thing, right? And the fact that this all came through typed, where I was able to do that, because I didn't, I'm not going to remember that off the top of my head, but if I did say control space, because it's TypeScript and we've got that autocomplete, I can see what my available options are, and I can just, ISO string, perfect, right? This is slick. This is really nice.
And do you want to see what happens when you navigate on the page? So we can see, I can showcase like the actual HTTP calls that happens when you use this page.
Yeah.
So if you open the network tab, and if we navigate to like the index page first and navigate into the post, because when you reload the page, you first get it rendered on the server. So if we go here and then navigate into a post.
So here's our post.
And you can see there that it does a query for post.byId and comments by ID in one request.
Yeah, post by ID, comments by post ID, batched. That's
and then what happens here is it takes the input arguments of the things you have, and it just does a JSON stringify on those and adds it as a big blob to the query string.
That's really nice.
Preview is usually easier to watch. The preview tab.
Preview, yeah. So we've got our Our JSON, here's each of the comments. And so these just kind of got passed through as values for each of those. That is really, really slick. And I love that it combined them to a single network request, because this is one of the things that I think causes people to reach toward GraphQL. Is the GraphQL is, I'm saying, here's all the data I need, and GraphQL sends it off as one request, right? And that batching kind of happens by default in the way that those queries are defined. But that's only sort of true, because if you're not thoughtful about your GraphQL and you send off 15 GraphQL requests, they're all going to be independently fired unless you've set up something like this batching. So what I like here is that what we set up in the example, if I go and look at this app here, I can close this one and let's close that down. We pulled in the HTTP batch link here, right? And then all we had to do was, when we set up this with tRPC, we just pass in the HTTP batch link. And my assumption is that what we're saying is, if you find requests from this particular endpoint, batch them together. That's what that configures.
So I've sort of stolen how Apollo and Urkel, that's two different clients for GraphQL. They have a concept of links and exchanges, and that's a way of controlling the data flow when the client sends a request and then when data is coming back. So there's three different ending links in tRPC. There's HTTP batch link, there's HTTP link, and there's WebSocket link, because we have WebSocket support as well. And what the batch link does, it's using this sort of data loader pattern that you might be familiar with GraphQL, that when it gets a request to do something, it doesn't fire that off straight away. It waits 1 millisecond before it fires it away. And then it takes all of those requests that has been done in that same tick and fires them off together. And then likewise on the server, we have a way in tRPC to handle batched requests.
Gotcha. Well, that just feels really powerful, that, for this little bit of config here, we get this benefit of these requests happening, kind of all at once. So a single request, post by ID, comments by post ID, so that we're not burning that extra time of HTTP overhead. And
another thing we can notice here is that it actually does an HTTP GET, which is one of the more annoying things with GraphQL, right? Is that everything is a post, so you can't cache anything.
That's true.
So here you can actually do HTTP level caching on queries pretty seamlessly. So if you deploy this on Vercel and you add some cache headers on the back end, you can actually have like a server-side rendered app with a lot of server-side requests, but cache all of the API responses on the edge by just adding some HTTP headers.
Gotcha. Very, very cool. So for a question from Alan in the chat is the time configurable for batching? Like if right now it waits 1 millisecond, can you tell it to wait 10 or something?
I had a feature for that because it's actually quite nice to use batching for optimistic prefetching as well. So like if you have a list of posts, you might want to be like, okay, let's fetch all of the posts on the page optimistically. But don't do it straight away, because you might like scroll and you might change the things that are in view. I never merged that pull request because it was sort of like, it felt like it was only me that was going to use it. But if someone wants to have that, just reach out, because then I can just like dust off that old PR and test for it and everything.
Nice. So if you've got a use case, chat, take it to the repo. And let's see, Arcnica is asking, would love to see tRPC in Vue and Nuxt. What would it take if somebody wanted to fire this up in Vue or Nuxt right now?
So we did some changes recently. There was some problems with ES modules to run it in Vue. So the Nuxt new version of Nuxt is using ES modules, which we had some interoperability problems with.
Okay.
I think I fixed those, but I haven't looked at it. I know there are example projects for Svelte, and if it works in Svelte, it should work in Vue as well.
Nice. Okay, so we're looking at about 19 minutes before we got to wrap this up. Do you think that is enough time to put together a very quick comment form and post? Yeah? All right, let's do it.
I mean, you've done the hard parts already. Now it's just copy pasta.
All right, let's do it. So I'm going to do, let's see, add a comment, and we'll put together a quick form for this. Figure out how that form is going to submit in a minute. But for now, we'll do a name, and the input is going to have an ID of name, type text, name of name, and duplicate that whole thing for, get it one too many times. Let's get the comment, and this one is going to be, let's make this one a text area.
So just a note here for people watching. In this example project, I'm not using any form library, but it's there's one that really integrates nicely, and that's React Hook Form. Because then you can actually reuse the same validator for your form on the front end and for your tRPC backend mutation.
Let's see, we don't have any styles, so I'm going to do this the quick and dirty way, which is just add line breaks so that everything sort of looks like a form. There we go. Okay, so we've got a basic setup here. Now I'm going to need to capture this form submit, so we can do an on submit, and that's going to need a handler. We'll call that handle submit. And then up here, we can do a function handle submit, and that's going to get the event. And this I'm going to need some help on because I can't remember how to type form submissions.
I can't remember how to type form submissions either. So I always inline them.
Oh my God, look at this. Is this correct?
It's not far off.
Holy crap, Copilot.
I mean, the tRPC use mutation needs to be in the render loop. Right.
So this
far off.
So this part,
that's a hook, right?
This will just be a called whenever somebody hits the submit button. So that'll be on any kind of user action. So this part we need to move out. In fact, why don't I'm just going to do that for right now. Kind of blown away by how well that worked. So that's going to be our input, which is name text, and we've got our post ID, which is the ID, which we don't currently have. So I'm actually going to drop that in as a hidden element. So we'll do input type hidden, name of post ID, and a value
so we would need to add code. Is that right?
Data ID?
Yeah, I think you have your use mutation in copy paste that you want to paste in here.
Oh, I actually definitely did not do that, but it's going to help us.
Oh, wow. It does the invalidation and everything. That's mad.
Okay, so this is going to be post ID instead of the regular ID, but otherwise...
Dang, it's like 80% right. That you can't just call tRPC.invalidate queries, but before that you have to you have to use the tRPC context on the line before. So do like const utils before this hook.
tRPC.
And then tRPC not use context. And that's a hook, so it needs to be in the in line in the render function.
Got it.
So the use hooks move that 2 lines up. Yeah.
Here.
All right.
Okay. So we've got our utils. It doesn't like this one, and I'm not sure why. No overload matches this call.
It's called ID in the backend, so it's not post ID.
Comments by ID?
No, not there. In the input.
Oh, I see what happened. Okay. So we've got our comments by post ID. That's the ID. We've got this. We need to actually define our comments add, and then this will give us a mutation. And to call that mutation, we put in our input.
Yeah, you need to do add comment dot mutate, I think.
Mutate. And
yeah. And now we need to make a mutation that takes that input. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Why doesn't it make this? Is that just because it's not set up yet?
Yeah, it's not set up yet. So I usually go the other way around, like I define my backend endpoints. Probably because then the type hints, helps you and whatever.
Okay, so now we have a dot query, and I can make a dot mutation, and that mutation is going to be called add. And we can drop down here. So I'm going to just save for a minute. The input is going to be, it was a z.object, and that needed,
we're going to skip the post ID, right?
Yeah. So we need a name and a post ID. Oh, it needs, oh, wow. Okay, does a UUID. And I'm not going to cap the name. Okay, so it can't be empty. Good. And then we have our async resolve. That needs to do something.
Yeah. It's done.
Unbelievable how good this is.
Wow, that's amazing. It's correct. Okay. It's exactly how you want it to be.
That is really impressive, how much GitHub Copilot just does for you. Okay, so that then works. And so out here, this now works and is doing what we want, which means, aside from the fact that this probably needs, I don't know, there's probably a way to type that, and I don't exactly know what it is.
What I usually do with submit handlers is that rather than defining them like in the render like this, is that I just have this as a big blob in the onSubmit handler instead, because then you get the type inferred.
Oh, I got you. Okay, so we'll just drop it right down here.
That's why I don't know how to do it, because I always do this.
Okay. And now it's happy.
Yeah.
Oh, and there's the type that we need. So if we ever do need to manually type it, we could do it like that. Okay, so we have our name, our comment. We have our input, which includes the name and comment value. We get our post ID, which is defined way up here. And then we have our mutation that runs. We reset the name and value. I think this will work. So let's try it again. Try it.
Woo!
Unbelievable. Okay. So then if I refresh the page, it's still there, right? And if I go out to Prisma Studio and I refresh, oh, Prisma Studio is not running anymore, so that's not going to show me anything. This is slick. This is really slick. So if I come back then to our homepage and I say another post, okay, so now when I go into my new post, right, all works. Another post, no comments, and we'll say, this is, I love it when things just make sense. Like I love how nice it is to work with tools that just get out of the way. And, it feels like what's happened here is once you get through the initial setup, because this to me makes sense. This file with the comments and everything that we created, it just makes sense. We're not using that, so we can drop it out. These app setups, they're not like they're a little overwhelming, but the fact that it's all built into the example is really, really nice. The baseline of the server, this honestly is not particularly overwhelming to look at. And it just kind of makes sense to me. You can see what we're doing. We're just adding more features there. This is really well done. This is really nice to use. And I can definitely see this making its way into a lot of apps for people who are going to be, looking at doing this sort of thing. So chat, who's stoked about this? Let's get a W in the chat if we're feeling it. Alex, where should people go if they want to learn more about this?
So on the tRPC website, there are a bunch of different example projects that you can have a look at. And also in the bottom of this footer, I should actually move it up. But in the bottom of the sidebar, sorry, there's an awesome tRPC collection, which is at the very bottom. And here there are more examples to look at. So there's React Native examples. So one thing that I'm really stoked about is like you can get this exact experience that we showed you in a React Native app. And I don't know anything else that can couple like your backend to your front end to an app like that.
Yeah.
So you get like auto completion of all the queries you want to do. You can easily update, and considering we have like over-the-air updates and stuff today, you don't really need to think about API versioning like you used to. So even if you sort of break it for an old app with a change, you can just roll out a new version to everyone silently.
Nice, very nice.
But yeah, I think the best thing to do is to go here to play around with the example app. If you get stuck, you can look at the docs. If you get stuck and something is not covered, don't hesitate to reach out on the Discord, on Twitter, or on the GitHub discussions. There's a bunch of people that are really helpful and help me with the sort of help channel and Discord and stuff like that.
Yeah, and this is really cool stuff. Make sure you go and check this out. If you build anything, make sure you share that with share it with me, share it with Alex. Put it out there. Learn in public, everybody. So with that, I think we're going to call this one a success. So let's head back over and just do a quick shout out to Rachel at Whitecoat Captioning, who's been doing the live captions this whole episode. Thank you so much, Rachel. And that's made possible through the support of our sponsors, Netlify, NX, and Backlight, all kicking in to make this show more accessible to more people. While you're checking out things on the site, you can go and take a look at the schedule. We've got a lot of good stuff coming up. We're going to have Brandon Roberts coming back to teach us how to build a live voting app with AppWrite. That's going to be a whole lot of fun. We're going to have Chance Strickland coming in teaching us how to build ES Build plugins. We're going to generate images dynamically using Node Canvas. You know me, I love to generate images, so that's going to be a lot of fun. And we've got even more coming that I haven't had a chance to put on the site yet, so stay tuned for those. You can get all of those on your calendar with Add on Google Calendar here, or you can follow on Twitch or subscribe on YouTube to make sure that you always get the latest episodes. Alex, any parting words for the chat?
No, just give me a shout out if you like it or hate it, or if you have ideas, or if you build something cool with it or something shit with it. Just like let me know if you look at it.
For sure. All right, y'all. I think we're gonna call that all done. So stay tuned. We're gonna go find somebody to raid. We will see you all next time.